I do hate the way that's an American accent. Hang on. Okay, let's do the share screen again. Okay, so back to, you can see the puppy again?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do much of the story that I'm going to go through now is a lot of the material we went through school. So it's really lovely to be able to say that the school children have really come up, you know, they're so thrilled that they've been part of hearing what the story's been all about. So you will see a little bit of that. And it kicked off, the reason that I know your family's story is because of this. This is in St Wilfrid's church. The school said to me, could they wanted to, they knew no fallen soldier. So they said to me, could I try and find out somebody and come up and do the research with the children? So I worked on this and got my friends from the Warrington Museum try and link it to a school. And we found Thomas Fairhurst was the one that they found. So that's what led me into Thomas's story. So, but for this, the school wouldn't have been doing it. There's Thomas. I don't know whether you've all seen a picture of Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got one, yes.
Right. Okay. So, you know, quite something. And again, I think when it's lovely for me when I do these stories of reminiscence, sometimes you don't get a picture of your soldier. And I think it's really important to me that we can see them. You get a feeling of what they look like. So there's Thomas. There's, you can see you have the family tree. I think there's 2 lines here. I thought you probably squashed it. So I think the lines we've got here from Thomas's family are down Margaret Fairhurst and is it Frank?
Yes, would be Frank, yes.
Right. So I don't know whether it's a shame really, because I'm assuming there will be families right across this family tree, but I just don't know of the lines down there. So but blimey, there's plenty of you. It's great to get to as many, and it is great to bring his story to life. Yeah, there were 9. So 11 lived in the house that Moira, you live in. So we're going to show that now. Before I do that, what I like to do on this is give sorry if some of this is going to be difficult to read, but this was the census, the first census from when Thomas was alive. So this is 1901. If you can see my cursor move, you'll see where I'm pointing out exactly where he was. So here's his dad, Frederick, who was the head of the house, was 38 in 1901, and he was a shedman in the local tannery. And of course, Thomas down here is an 8-year-old boy. You know, not still at school, still at St Wilfrid's, as we know. Here's the school record. The Grappenhall History Society very kindly found this for me. Second name at the top.
Yeah.
Thomas Fairhurst. And he was born on the 14th of June, 1892, and he started school on his birthday, the 14th of June, 1897. And there's his house down as Knutsford Road. We only ever get Knutsford Road, I'm afraid, in addresses, but it was brilliant for the school children to see his name in the register. Definitely brought him to life. That is 1907 when when Thomas finished school in 1907. Well, this is a picture of Grappenhall in 1907. There's the ram's head. So I think it's just a nice thing to get your head around. That's, you know, that's how it looked back in the day. And okay, that the people and I think what they're wearing is slightly different. But certainly the picture of Grappenhall feels very similar. And this is what was known then as Ivy Cottage. So this is where Moira lives.
Oh, isn't that pretty?
Isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, well done, Moira. You've made it a beautiful home. And it was known at the time as Thatch Cottage. And thank you, Moira, for giving me that photograph.
Richard's house.
It's what it would have looked like back in the day. So when Thomas, the remarkable thing is, remember what I said, that cottage, 11 people lived. It was actually 2 cottages, Maura, you shared with me, and in the records I found it referred to Ivy Cottages.
Yes.
So it's quite a story in itself, that. And you'll love the next picture. 56 children descended on Moira and Harry. It was so lovely, you know, and the kids were so enthusiastic about coming there. And you can see right in the middle, the little girl holding a picture of Thomas. And there's a poppy underneath that. So Moira will have that on a front window on Remembrance Day. Yeah. So a really special thing to do. And again, just fantastic that your relative is now, the school know him. The children are saying to me, they feel like it's one of their own. He's one of their own. They've got to learn so much of his story. The census of 1901 has got still Father Fred is a shedman in the local tannery. And this is where we find out that Thomas, and it's an important part of his story, you can just see here, is a gardener. And when I did the research, I looked at the family and I tried to see who else was out there, his family, and what were they doing. I went right up to his great-grandfather and I went through his male siblings, and pretty well everyone in the Fairhurst family was worked in the tanneries. It's massively tannery based, and the fact that Thomas wasn't, I think there's a story in itself. And the tanneries, I mean, there's a picture I put up there. The tanneries was the worst job in the world. Horrendous work. Conditions were awful. It would have been the roughest, hardest. Everyone I hear that knows what it says, the smells were like nothing you'd ever want to experience. It was just an horrific job. And I think it says something. There's Grappenhall, so you can see the school here. And the cottage we're talking about where Moira lives and where Thomas lived is here. And the three blue circles are where the tanneries were. This map is from the late 1800s. So there where the tanneries were, and Thelwall Hayes at the back here. Yes. Many of you will know Thelwall Hayes is where Thomas was a gardener. So the owner of Thelwall Hayes owned these two tanneries. He didn't own this one here, but he owned these two tanneries. And my view is that I think that Thomas was a sensitive character. It sounds to me like his father didn't want him anywhere near the factory. And he's had a word with the owner of the two factories and said, how about, you know, a gardener role, massive gardens around the Hayes. And that was the job he took. So we've kind of wondered whether we've got a very sensitive character here. And I think you'll see what I tell you later, I think backs that up. So
does he know that you live there?
So there's Thelwall Hayes, as it was back in the day. And the next picture you'll also love. The kids fancied going there as well.
Oh, why not?
So there they were outside. Mark, who owns there, just about to move, was so good to us, and he allowed us to walk around the gardens and the grounds. So the children have really got an experience here of what normal life was like pre-war, how idyllic it was, you know, living in that lovely cottage, walking to his walk to work would be, there's the cottage here, and this would have been his walk. That you can't go there now, that it's sort of all overgrown. You know, it would
next door.
Yeah, it would have been idyllic. It would have been, and I think the children really got that. Just very quickly, Thelwall Hayes was a hospital during World War One, so it has a link almost to Thomas's story. And this is inside. I didn't go inside, but Mark took a photograph for me, and it commemorates the fact that during the Great War, it was a hospital. And it was run by somebody called Anne Lucy Frost, who got the MBE because of her work leading the hospital. So it has quite a piece of history in itself. Obviously, Thomas wouldn't have been, he didn't come home, so he wouldn't have known of this. Right, now we're into his war, into the start of the documentation that I have. We're really lucky. The service records from soldiers were mostly burned, ironically, in the Blitz in the Second World War. So I think you've got a 1 in 6 chance of finding the service record of your relative. You are so lucky that Thomas's service record survived, but you can see from this document I've put up the damage. So you can see there's a fair bit of fire damage going there. Fortunately, I don't think there's any document. There are 19 documents that survive, and none of them are damaged enough that you can't read the bits that most matter. Even up here, we laughed at, because his regimental number 2444, if you can just about see that, we thought, well, there might be some numbers the other side of that. It isn't. The burn stopped right on the start of his regimental number. So, because we've proven a few places. So this is him signing up September 1914. He was in the territorials before war broke out, and he's joined up pretty much as war starts. He's wanted to go there very, very quickly. So these are great photographs I got. These are the Warrington Pals. This is Thomas's regiment. So there they are on the grounds of the town hall. This is in early September, and the start of their journey. It's great to have pictures of the 4th Battalion. So there they are at Bank Keep. This is September, and they were heading up to Scotland. And it says later on, it says on the piece at the bottom there, 5 months later, they were in the trenches remarkably quickly from being trained. They were thrown into war. They've had no time really to. I think that's a very short time, but needs must. There they are mounting the train at Bank Keep. And who knows, Thomas could be on one of the photographs I'm showing on a few of them. So there they are, September 1914, they're up. And again, this picture is of the Warrington, South Lancashire.
They've got all these, yeah.
So there they all are in training at Dunfermline camp, and they were there through just for about 6 weeks before they then moved on to Tunbridge Wells.
That's where we are now.
I believe so. Yeah, when I heard that, Christine, I thought, well, how remarkable is that?
Yeah.
So that picture is of the South Lancashire 4th Battalion. It's the one that Thomas is in training in Tunbridge Wells. So it's a fantastic thing to have that. So in October, mid-October, they finished, and the training carried on. Mid-October, they started at Tunbridge Wells. And on February the 12th, the South Lancs, and they're heading for France. So they're heading to war. 12th of Feb, so soon after they'd been training. And the ship they sailed on was the turbine steamer Queen Alexandra. And there's a picture of the steamer that took them over. And that's a great thing to have. Gosh, what an image of what they went over. And I think there were hundreds and hundreds of men. It would have been awful conditions, but obviously not a massive crossing. Although where they did cross, they crossed to Le Havre, which was where the vast majority went. Many went to Boulogne, which is an awful lot nearer, but they went to Le Havre. That's my photograph of Le Havre. It was absolutely blasted in both world wars. So the picture we see now is certainly not how it would have looked like in 1915. And there they are. Once they got off the boat, they were thrown into the trains to head north, ironically. I'll show you a map in a minute. I think each carriage, I read, carried either 80 men or 10 horses. And the soldiers complained of horrific conditions. They were just sardines in there. They didn't care, and it was standing room only. And
so how many would there have been then in the regiment?
It's a battalion we're talking here. All this story is about the 4th Battalion. So this is about South, and there will be about 750. So all the story I'm going to give now is of where these 750 men went who were in the 4th Battalion, South Lancashire. And I'll break it down. We know that Thomas was in B Company, and a company is going to be something like 175. So you're making it shorter now as to exactly what he was involved with. But you can see, interesting that they'd sail from Southampton in the top left here, all the way down to Le Havre, to then bung them on a train to go all the way back up north. And part of that is because Le Havre was such a major encampment for all the new soldiers, all the new recruits coming over. So I think probably it was easier for them to organise. I don't know how they decided that, because many went through Boulogne, which seemed sensible. And both of these places are pretty safe, certainly from fighting on land. That the risk would have been U-boats, but that's his start. That's his first journey into war, and he ended up at a place called. In fact, it's just off my picture. You can see here he's heading that line at the top here is Belgium. So he's immediately heading for the Ypres sector.
Oh yeah.
So even though the story will become French later, you can see here he's heading for Belgium. So the place he first stopped and he spent, Belle-Île was a place that many of the soldiers passed through, particularly if you were heading into Belgium. That too was destroyed towards the end of the war. So that is the photograph as Thomas would have seen it. But I haven't been there myself, but I have seen photographs of it now. And like many of these villages and towns, they rebuild them exactly as they were. So they look very, very much like they did. But that photograph is taken pre-war. So he's then on the march. He's then off to a place called Loughborough, and they were put into this convent. And I was amazed to get a photograph of that, to get a picture of it. But the war diary refers to when they were there, conditions were absolutely awful, and they've recorded that, quote, ground was like set blancmange with a plentiful supply of glue. So this is winter. They're just in an awful time. And B Company, Thomas's company, had to hang around because they didn't have enough huts for them. So they were out in the cold and the weather. So he's not had a good all the way through. He just seems to have been so unlucky in so many ways. But one of the references in the war diary referred to, quote, never known a regiment, especially a territorial force, be sent up to the firing line so quickly after landing. He's had absolutely no time to find his feet. He's from getting off the boat. They are, within a month, they're heading right into the worst of the fighting, as will be. And so they end up in a place called La Clete in March 1915. And again, this picture is of the 4th Battalion. So this is Thomas's battalion. And I think you can see in that picture, they are freezing. They're just trying to keep warm. They have nowhere, tents at best. So conditions, I always think we talk about the action when our relatives are fighting. The truth is just staying alive would have been a challenge, week after week, month after month. And that's to give you a feel of what I've just said. So the work started at Belle and went to Loughborough, and then the Belgium spelling is different. And you can just see at the top there, Ypres. So you can see where he's heading. Is the first action through the war is going to be up there, and critically Bayernwelt, so I'm going to mention in a minute. So around here is actually where he heads. Where my cursor, you can see that is going around. That's actually where he heads. So he's not heading right into Ypres. This is about far, but this sector is just horrendously dangerous. And Kemmel Hill, where I was putting my circling my cursor, was a place called Kemmel Hill. Almost always on the Western Front, you'll find the Germans are on the high ground, and they made the whole Hindenburg line was that way. So we were always against the odds when we were going over the top when we left our trenches. Kemmel Hill was an exception. Kemmel Hill, the Allied forces had, the British had. That was a picture of it when I went there. That's what it looked like at the end of the war. Just devastated. And the trenches there actually exist to this day. And we didn't go and have a look around them. If I'd known of this story, I would have. But the place where, an interesting part of this story, but they call it Bavarian Wood, the Germans. Adolf Hitler was here.
Wow.
So, and some of his paintings that he did after the First War around this area. So Thomas would have probably been very close to a certain Adolf Hitler, which is a remarkable connect.
Yeah.
Right. I thought quickly it's worth showing you, because to understand where he was and how he fit into history, you'll have probably heard of the Ypres salient, if anyone's ever read anything about this. A salient, in my crude language, is kind of a sticky out bit. So this was here's Ypres, and you can see how the Germans on the right, British forces on the left, the Allied. So this salient here, they were really dangerous, and you'd often hear them referring to straightening the line, wanting to straighten the line. And if you think about it, it's understandable, because coming underneath the underbelly here of the salient would have been horrendously dangerous for any Allied forces here, because you've got people in front of you, the enemy in front of you and behind you. So really dangerous. I would say this is probably the most dangerous part of the Western Front during the First World War. And this is where Thomas first goes. And there's Kemmel. And where he first goes is the blue line, is the Allied trenches, the red, the German. He's right on this line, which I'm going to talk you through now. So the place he goes to is a place all named by ourselves, a place they call Peckham Farm, which is here. Forget the crate for the time being. He was at Peckham Farm, and Wichita, the British soldiers called it White Sheet. They couldn't handle any of the foreign names, so it was White Sheet to the British soldiers. So he's very close here to the German front line, really right in at the start of the war. That is the top left there, that is Peckham Farm. And the walk down from Kemmel to there was down a road, White Sheet Road, as they would have called it. They renamed it Suicide Road, that the soldiers walking out must have been horrendous. Thomas, again, would have had all that. Would have been a really frightening day's march to get to this point. And when they came here, the war diary refers to it as tough conditions in the trenches that were full of water, snow, and frost and mud. It just sounded horrific. Terrible time of the year to come. And they stayed in this trench here for 8 days. Interestingly, though, Peckham Farm, I said there is in the top left, the Peckham Farm that Thomas would have seen is where the water is. That water was a mine, a crater caused by a mine set off not very long after Thomas left this sector. And part of his story is the war developed, particularly later on, where awful mines were laid in the trenches. We did it to each other, and the most horrific sights you can imagine of all that explosive being put under where the men were in the trenches. And everyone who witnessed that, and that crater remains to this day. So you can kind of picture what that must have looked like. But that's actually the location where he would have been. But around this time, and there's in the distance, so up here is the town of Whiteshade, and just to the left here is where I'm saying Thomas would have been. This was the area that Thomas would have been in. So if you do go and visit these sites, I go pre-COVID, I would go an awful lot. And they are very much open fields, but it's an amazing piece of history when you can get there and see exactly what your relative has done. So we're into early March 1915 here. The first planned offensive of the war from the Allied forces was at a place called Neuve Chapelle, and they wanted a diversionary attack. So Thomas and his battalion was sent to this place called Spanbroek-Merlin to dig support and assault trenches. His group were called the Pioneers, and what they tended to do was they were used almost as engineers to make the trenches good. So they weren't particularly frontline infantry at the time. They became it, but they were very much to secure the trenches, sandbag them, whatever. But they're right at the front line. So whilst they're doing this, they're being fired at, they're being shelled. So, there's no easy ride at any stage of this, but that's what they're doing. And at this Spanbroek-Merlin, they're digging support trenches. And again, it's snowy conditions within sight of the German, the German trenches. Some men are hit. Now, this site, the picture, this is my picture. They now call this place the Pool of Peace, which I think is delightful.
It looks like that.
Yeah.
And it is. If you didn't know, you'd just say it's the most beautiful place. You'd take a picnic, but it's another crater that was set off there. A mine that was set off, and the crater has been filled in. So it has got a tragic history, but it's nice that they've converted it into something like this.
Yeah.
And when they were there, I said some men were hit. The only bit of Kemmel, remarkably, that wasn't blasted this time was the chateau. And that's a picture of it from the time. And that was used by the men as a hospital base. So whoever in Thomas's battalion would have been wounded at this time would have ended up here. I don't know whether it's still there today. It's brilliant to get a picture of it. They were then moved to a place called Dickerbush, which is the centre. Most of the soldiers who were around Ypres, this seemed to be a massive centre where they were pulled away from the front line. And Thomas's 4th Battalion stayed as a picture of where they stayed. It looks like a farm set up to me. So this is March 1915. He's had his first taste of being in trench. And I would have thought he would have been absolutely made up to get out of that and finish at Dickerbush camp. But then soon after that, I mentioned Bayernwald. Well, Bayernwald is next. Bois Quarant is the forest there. But I think I said the Germans called it Bayernwald because it looked like back home for them. So the next stage, we're into mid-late March now. They were immediately told they had to head out. So they are actually now going to the front line. So they are preparing themselves for battle. So they go through a place called Ridgewood then they go through the outskirts of Elsenweiler, which I hope you can see on the map. They take up positions at Wagram. The Germans that's the German, blue is the German trench line. they just backed off 100 yards. They often did this to get better ground. So it freed this area that at the moment looks like it's in German hands. And that's where Thomas ended up. But remarkably, in the war diary, all they were doing was working on the trenches. They were sandbagging them, but they were 20 yards from the German trenches.
Okay.
And I tried to recreate that with the children because we couldn't believe it. And when we were in the gardens of Thirlwall Hayes, we sat in 2 trench lines.
Oh, wow. That's so close.
Incredible. And I got all the children to keep absolutely as quiet as they could. And I said, any of you even cough, I want the other line to tell me if you hear it. And they were so good. They didn't make a noise. So I walked after about half a minute. I walked up to a couple to say, just whisper your name to your friend. And they whispered the name. And I turned to the other line and said, did you hear that? And they all said, yeah. And just think of that. And he was there 8 days. It must have been unbelievable, the pressure of that. So even though he's, his first, sometimes when you do tend to think, well, what battle's going on at the time, just existing would have been so scary for him. In April, while he's there was about 4 miles away from where I've just shown you, was a place called Hill 60, and this is I've been there. My friend Jeff, he had a great uncle that was there. And at the time, I think it's critical to Thomas's story, whilst he was there, massive mines were put underneath. So again, you've got tunnelers going underneath, laying all these mines. And when they're set off, there's just tremendous devastation. You can see the terrain here from the shelling. So even though this is a photograph of only a few years ago, look at the shape of the ground. You can see, there's little pock marks. And one of the mines is there. So you can see again, just look at the size of that and imagine anything in that area and around it must have been real devastation. Well, the Warrington pals, the 4th Battalion, witnessed all this at Hill 60. So he's 4 miles away, but they will have been very, very aware of what was going on there. Well, if you do go and visit there, that's a picture of that. In fact, you can see the date at the top there, 9th of April 1915. Thomas was there on the 9th of April 1915. And that photograph, when you stand, you look out as to what it looks like now, and those pictures joined up show you how the trenches were at the time. It's quite a remarkable memory of the whole story. Right, we're now into, he's landed. So he's in April, out just south of Ypres. There were 3 battles of Ypres. The second one was in 1915, the third one in 1917. The second one was started by the German forces. And as you can see from this picture, it was the very first extensive use of chlorine gas. They have used it before, but not to the same scale. It must have been absolutely terrifying. The target was northeast of Ypres, so it wasn't where Thomas was. But the war diary refers to men from his battalion suffered watering eyes and vomiting. So the gas definitely reached them, but not at the scale had he been right at the north end of Ypres. So he's lucky he was at the other end, but they've still been affected by it. And I think that and it was early days of gas. So I think they wouldn't have known quite how to handle that. So it would have been a horrible story. Just in terms of context, what was going at this point down, I thought it worth putting this in. Herbert Asquith was the Liberal Prime Minister at the time. And just as this Battle of Ypres, second battle was happening, his government was massively criticised for, there was a controversy around inadequate supplies, artillery shells, you name it. The soldiers didn't have enough. The Germans had plentiful supplies, but the British soldiers were told you had to, be careful with how much ammunition you use, how much shelling you use. So if they did do well in a particular attack, they had to halt because they couldn't carry on. They didn't have the gear. So Asquith was massively criticised. So his government fell down, but a coalition, which he led still, then followed. Eventually, Lloyd George became Prime Minister, I think in December 1916. But all this is happening while Thomas is in the trenches and witnessing Hill 60 and that going off. So in the middle of all that, the stories would have fed back to him that, and by the way, our Prime Minister's come down. So it must have felt at this time like everything was going against them, that, it was their world was collapsing. So we're up to June 3rd, 1915. The battalion was on the move and they they were heading for the front line, and they knew it at this point. That photograph is from June 1915. So that's what Ypres looked like so early on in the war. The town itself of Ypres was almost didn't take apart because the men were either side of it, the Allied forces and the enemy forces. It was just shelled it was obliterated. And it is a shame. I have to put that picture in because that's the cloth hall there, what's left of it. And that's the cloth hall today. They rebuilt it as was. And trust me, if any of you ever are in the area, Ypres is the most beautiful place for all its tragic history. It's a beautiful place to visit. And yes, it does remember all his men, as you'd expect. So Thomas has gone through Ypres. He's heading east to the trenches just east of it. And just about, less than a mile east of Ypres was Hellfire Corner. Hellfire Corner was without doubt the most dangerous place on the Western Front. It was absolutely, in terms of the terrain, it was within sight of the enemies all the time. So if you had to pass through it to get to even the Allied trenches, and to do that, coming through this place. So I'm again thinking of, remember what I said about Thomas, the sensitive nature, what he's going through. All this in the first few months of going over there. He's not built to be able to handle this. I don't know who is, but he certainly isn't. So they got through Hellfire Corner. That's it today, by the way. You wouldn't know it had any history. It's the roundabout on the left there. There's hardly any reference to it. You really wouldn't know that it was it had that history. So we ended up in Sanctuary Wood. Again, that's how it is. That was my photograph of that area today. That was Sanctuary Wood in 1915. So again, we have to remember, when you do go and visit these sites, you see lovely rolling green fields, farmers' fields. Of course, it wasn't like that. And in the winter, they would be like craters because the shells had dropped in their thousands. So many men drowned, as much as they were killed through the enemy fire. So he's in Sanctuary Wood. 4 days again that he's working on the trenches. So it's not in battle. They're making the trenches good. They work through there and then they walk back to the outskirts of Poppering, but they know at this stage something big is about to happen. It's a week away from the 4th Battalion being in the front line fighting for the first time. So they know something's happening. And where it's going to happen, here's Hellfire Corner on the left. So that is just a mile on the east of Ypres. And the place where the Warrington pals, I call them that, the 4th Battalion, were at Bellewaerde. Now, I know this area incredibly well because I mentioned my mate Jeff. His great uncle died just south of the Menin Road, which we can see there. And we stayed at a place that is here by Bellewaerde Lake. So there is a hotel, and gosh, you're right in the middle of it all. I didn't know the story of Thomas then. Thomas and the 4th Battalion, where you can see Cambridge Road here, Railway Wood here. This is where the Warrington 4th Battalion were. So they were all coming here in reserve. And the Germans, you can see the German trenches here. I'm not going to pose this, but I have wonderful artifacts of these are the trenches. This is the map at the time of the 16th of June. Likewise, these are the trenches at the time. So I know there'll be, I'll finish this with saying how many of you would like these things. And I know some of you, I know Anthony, you're going to say, yes, please. I want all those. Yeah, and I'm sure others will. There's some great documentation I can share with you. What I don't want to do is too much. So that, and again, just get a feeling where it is. So there's Ypres, the Menin Gate, where they do the last posts every day. They crossed through this, where the cross is where their battalion headquarters was. So they stay there for a day to then move through Hellfire Corner, and they ended up here at Bellewaerde. Now, the site from Bellewaerde back down is on my next picture, I think. Yeah, there you go. So there's the battalion headquarters towards Ypres. So this photograph is taken from where the 4th Battalion would have been. So where, again, these what's left of these trees, and there are trenches in here, that is where Thomas would have been heading. That was the horror of it all. And it did go badly wrong. That they did well to start with, and then I think, sorry, this is a bad document to read on a presentation, but it just refers to that day. Their first attack, 276 casualties, and it's a massive day. 16th of June is commemorated as a result of that. It was probably the biggest day. And I have, from that, I have no photographs. You would be court-martialed if you took a photograph during what you could take one back in the villages when you're training, but you couldn't take any, and there would be frightening consequences to it all. Remarkably, I bumped into a story that one of the 4th Battalion, he took his camera and he hid it. Now that must have been something, because cameras back in the day would have been very big. So you have, this is oh God, I'll come to it in a minute. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. This is my picture of Bellewaerde. So that's not the building that was there. There was a mansion there during the war that was devastated. So that's been built in the last 80, 90 years. See all the shells? They're still digging the shells up here.
Oh, wow.
Look at them all. It's a frightening area. I think this is as dangerous as it gets, where Thomas's first taste of war was, as dangerous as it gets, horrifying. That again is just looking back. That's where I stayed. The modern bit, here's the older building. That building were the stables to the mansion during the war, and obviously totally destroyed. And this here, Thomas's battalion would have been just behind this pond. Again, it's another crater caused by a mine. So a part of this area, it was a real key part of the First World War in this sector. And it is a pretty picture now. I've got some even more beautiful pictures of the sun rising, but its history is horrendous, you know. That's the photograph I was referring to. 16th of June, 4th Battalion, South Lancs, taken on the day back. He should not have taken that photograph, but that is right in the heat of battle. It's a remarkable picture. I've never seen anything like it. You just don't get these pictures, 2 pictures stuck together, I should say. But that was the story up until that point, and I'm almost then into the next year. But it's not Thomas's story, because when we look at the service record for Thomas, you can see this is his medical report. And when you look at the medical report, again, if you can see my cursor, the date is down this column. The 15th of June, if you remember, I said then the 16th of June is when the 4th Battalion went over the top. On the 15th of June, the day before, he's at I'll read, the writing's hard to read. It was a field ambulance. And then the same day, he's at number 8 casualty clearance station. 2 days later, he's at 8th stationary hospital, and he ends up in a convalescent. So he's taken away the day before they go over the top. He's taken out of it. And the reason he's taken out of it, I don't know, maybe if you're good at this, the word at the top there, neurasthenia. Neurasthenia is what we call shell shock. So my summation to this is, bearing in mind, I said, I think this is a very sensitive boy stroke man. His job took him out of the factories, took him away from that, put him as a gardener. All the way through, it just strikes you of a man who's a really sensitive. So he's coming into something that, I don't know, any of them handle it, but he in particular couldn't. Now, this is a remarkable story, because in 1915, actually throughout the war, but particularly in 1915, that was treated as cowardice. You couldn't back out because you were scared. So for me, that can only mean that his behavior was so odd, so extreme, that he was a danger to himself and to his company, his battalion. So this is a really serious case. And he's 2 months before he's then returned and back, you know, in the field. So for all that build up to that story of what the South Lancs 4th went through, that night before, he's pulled out of it all. And there is while I'm on this document, there's an incredible thing here, and I got the children really trying to guess what it was. The very bottom line here, on the 27th of July, so he's still recuperating. He's only a month having suffered the shell shock, severely reprimanded.
Oh dear.
So he's at the base depot at Rouen. So he's out of hospital. He's out of the convalescent home. He's back, but he's not well enough to go back to the front line. They've sent him to the base depot, and he's severely reprimanded. And I've no idea why. The only thing I can say is, you won't be able to see it, but just below where it says severely reprimanded, it says the king, and then you can't read anything. And I just wondered, has he said something against the king sarcastically, or who knows? But I just don't know. It's a really strange thing. And the thing is, he's commended all the way through the service record. So whatever he did isn't that serious, even though it's a severe reprimand. He's a man of great reputation, but I thought that what a thing to have on your medical record as well, remarkable story that. So there's him at Ypres, and there's him the next 2 months then. And I've got pictures of where he was. Field ambulance, that's not where he was, but that's what a field ambulance would have looked like. A field ambulance could be 2 men with a stretcher. It could be a horse with a cart. It was basically the field ambulance got you out of exactly the location you were at. It's the first stage of when you were taken wounded. His next stage, and this is the place where Thomas was at number 8 casualty clearance station at Battalion. Now, normally the casualty clearance stations are just tented villages. They just create them in the fields near where they're fighting. This looks to be a proper brick building. So this would be his next stage of, checking him over. And within 2 days, he's at a stationary hospital, and that is the hospital he was at. So on the Wimereux, this is north. I'll show you where it is on the map in a second at Wimereux. So when he's back here, he's probably getting for the first time proper treatment. And I think these stationary hospitals specialised. So I think this one would have had. They knew little about mental well-being back then, but they knew a little bit about it. And I think this one specialised in that. So hopefully, he wasn't treated as coward at this stage. He was seen as being very ill. I think that's likely, the fact that he's here. There's a lovely story here about it. And for you, Caroline, I think I've mentioned this, that there is a link to Wimereux. John McCrae, who wrote in Flanders Fields, is buried at Wimereux. He was a doctor, actually. He was during the war, and he died and was buried at Wimereux. So where Thomas was recuperating, there's John McCrae's grave. So there is so at the service, Caroline's going to read that poem. And it is a remarkable link to Thomas's story. The children really got that. They really understood that. I think it's nice sharing that. There's the convalescent building in Boulogne he then ended up at before he went to the base camp at and to me, they all look quite intimidating. I would have thought pretty scary, every bit of this for him. Going in so ill as he must have been, horrific nature of that area around Bellewaerde, and then, coming to all this. Gosh, the poor chap, how hard this must have been. And that Google Maps, I'm afraid, can't do World War I marches. So I think it's probably more a straight line from Battalion to Wimereux. But I'll just give you a feeling of, so he's come away from the Ypres sector, and he's safe here. He's well away from anything. And Rouen is a long way south of here, where he ends up. So at this stage, he is in a good place. Okay, so I'm going to go into the second year, the last year of his war. But just before I do that, this is the war diary. Again, I'm going to say to those people who'd like to have this, I can send you this. But in November, so he's only just back with the front line, he's back with his in the field. On the 3rd of November here, His Majesty the King visited the troops. So they were remarkably blessed. King George V decided, much against advice, he wanted to come and boost morale. I don't think they did. My dad used to say the story in the Second World War. If ever they got a dignitary come in, they hated it because they just didn't feel a connect when your life every day is at risk. So I'm not so sure they'll have thought this was a great thing. So there is a picture which I found of King George in November 1915. So he would have been probably in the sector, there's no doubt would have been in the area that Thomas was. It's 99% certain Thomas would have been there. I'm only hesitating on that because on his record, he had a week's holiday. The only leave he got throughout his war was in November 1915. So this was the 3rd of November. So I don't know. It's possible that he was on leave when the king arrived. Maybe that's what he said. Maybe that's when he got his leave approved and he was told the king was coming. He might have said something, who knows? But he may well have seen him. I think the odds are he probably did because he only took him out a few days here. But and then as we go into January, again in the middle here, you see Sir Douglas Haig. Anybody know your history? Sir Douglas Haig was the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces during the mid part of the First World War, so early January 1916. He is a really controversial character. Depending on who you speak to, some people think that the lambs to the slaughter. They blame the likes of Haig. Others say it wasn't like that, but he met the Warrington guys, the 4th Battalion. So an interesting part of their history. And he met them at a place called, so we're now into Belgium. It's January 1916. We're at Renninghurst, which was at the time said to be incredibly quiet. January 1916, I'm not surprised. So the Ypres fighting had stopped. Like most of the battles of the First War, they went nowhere. They gained a few miles. Just nothing happened really of any note. So there he is in Renninghurst at the top of the screen. So he's in Belgium. They marched to Balleur, and then between the period got between up towards the end of January, they go on a train down through Pont-Remy up to a place called Hallencourt. So, and when he's at Hallen, basically they're training them. So they pull them away from the sector, the main sector. He's now in training. The notes I've picked out here were mostly musketry practice. So whenever they're not fighting, they're training them. They train and train and train and train, partly to stop them being bored, but obviously partly to improve their skills. So at this time, he's miles away from the front. They've had their Ypres experience and they're pulled clear of that. And this map, I think maps are great, important when you're learning about your relatives' war, because, I think we all want to know where they were. So from Hallencourt, they headed for, so I've got here up until February the 17th. So they're doing not an awful lot. They're working on railway sidings, they're training again. So they moved them out. They got the train to Méricourt-sur-Somme, and like some of these journeys are train, a little bit of marching to a station. And I think a load of work was done around Bonneville and Amplier. Beaumetz, which is the last place I've named on there, was the divisional headquarters. So between now and when Thomas dies, Beaumetz is the divisional headquarters. So really, I've put here till February the 17th, but actually Beaumetz would be a place that he spent an awful lot of time at up until his last few months. That's a picture of Beaumetz. It absolutely wouldn't have been like that because it would have been obliterated, but that's it today. And this is an absolutely brilliant thing I found in the war diary. When they were at Beaumetz, they were working on the 4th, you can see at the top there, 4th South Lancashire, were working on the divisional headquarters. They were building underground, fantastically, they were building underground properties, bit of accommodation, which you can see right underneath. And for at least 9 months, they were working on that. And this plan was drawn by somebody in B Company, and we know that's the company that Thomas was in. It won't have been Thomas because I don't think he's a technical drawer, but wonderful record in the war diaries of what your relative was involved in, and he was working on that for months. In February and March, they went, Basso was on there, wasn't very far away. I understand Basso was never touched during both the wars, so that picture is exactly how it would have been. And they were working on the railway line where it crossed the river. So you can see during this period, they're just working. They're working headquarters, improving communication lines. And it's what they kind of all went through. So from February up until June, they're staying at any of these places. They're staying at Beaumetz, where the headquarters was, Basso, as I've just shown the picture, and the road between Guyon-Artois and Montchier. Again, they worked hard on. And when I say they, I mean the B company. I mean his company. So I'm into the 175 of them. This is the sector he's working in. You can see that's quite near Arras. Now, fighting was always close to Arras, so they're not that very far from and actually would have been within range of the big shells from the Germans. So they're certainly not safe here. So I think you'll know we're now getting very close towards his end. I suspect most of you, if you say to most people in the UK, what do you think about the First World War? I think most would say the Somme or Ypres. But the Somme, the 1st of July 1916, is the worst day in British military history. There were 19,000 killed and 54,000 casualties on one day, just on that one day. Absolutely horrific. The 4th Battalion of the South Lancs, Thomas, was in reserve at the Beaumats at the divisional headquarters when on the 1st of July. So, he didn't experience. But the war diary referred to smoke barrages being sent on the enemy front line was still within reach. And the trenches were heavily bombed from where they were. So the shells could reach that far. But for the first 3 weeks of the Battle of the Somme, they are at divisional headquarters. They're not in reserve. They're not ready to go. They're not the next line. So he misses the beginning of the battle. But then as he goes through July, and I've got his route there, they marched to a place called Sombrin. About half an hour after leaving the divisional headquarters at Beaumets, it was shelled. It was shelled really badly. So I don't know whether they knew what was coming or they were just lucky, but they within half an hour, they had a very lucky, fortunate escape, I think. And you can see then they're heading to, there's a place called Cannes. So as they get towards the end of July, they're heading the front line again. Guillemont is very near where he dies. I'll come back to that. But he's heading, Meaulte is where all of this Free Corps is front line. So that's his next part of the war. And this just south of Guillemont. So the 7th to the 9th of August, he's unlucky. I can say that a few times. B Company were selected to go and join the fighting, the frontline fighting in this area at Maltshorn. Maltshorn Farm is circled in red, and Maltshorn Trench is just to the left of it. So where my cursor's moving is Maltshorn Trench. That is where Thomas was between the 7th and the 9th of August, and that was frontline fighting. And in the records, there were men wounded. There were, it wasn't an easy time for them. But fortunately, it was only 3 days on that period. And they picked, whether B Company was deemed to be a stronger company, I don't know, but they seem to be selected for much of the fighting. That they never are ignored. So once they were through to the end of August, they moved back to Méricourt. They're then on a train, so they're then taken away. They often did that. They didn't like them to be exposed to the worst of the horrors of the fighting for too long. So you can see he's come all the way back to a place called Ainville, where they're training. They're doing all sorts of things. But we are now only a few days from his death, and we know they then headed back to Delville Wood. Just put that up to say, when you're doing your research for your relative, finding these trench maps is amazing. That's the trench map for Delville Wood, and we know that's where Thomas died, in this area, but at this point didn't know exactly where. Here is the war diary for the day he died. I've underlined in blue references to B Company, so these are the 2 days preceding, and you can see on here on the 8th of September it refers to B Company proceeded to join 164th Brigade in line. So again, this is the battle now of Ginchy, which is just north of Guillemont. And you can see they're heading right to the front line. And on the 9th of September, A, B, and C companies as yesterday. And right at the underneath that, casualties, 3 OR killed. OR means other ranks. So Thomas is one of these 3 killed.
Oh.
So and actually, I do know that he was killed by, they were strengthening the trench there, even though they were right in the front line. Bearing in mind, there were about 175 in the company. 3 died. He was really unlucky. And they didn't expect the shelling to come over as it did. And I suppose you could say any story is a tragic story, but just he seems to have been so unlucky. This is the scene of, there's the 164th Brigade. This is the plan on the day of the 9th of September when he died. That is where the 164th Brigade were. So you can see the village of Ginchy. This is Delville Wood at the top left. So they're right by Delville Wood. And we know this is the day he died. So he's somewhere here. Now, I could have ended the story here and thought, well, that's all we're going to find out. But in the war diary, actually, this photograph, I did a similar story for a friend of mine whose relative was in this area at the same time. And the reconnaissance planes were untouched. This photograph is of the German trenches around Delville Wood when Thomas was there. So I thought I'd throw it into this presentation. It's an absolutely stunning artifact of what went on around here. And I think this is Delville Wood, the big one in the middle here. So what an amazing thing to survived all these years, and it does tell the story. Equally, these pictures are of the fighting at Ginchy on the 9th of September. So this is not the 4th Battalion of the South Lancashires, but it is a photograph of the fighting at Ginchy on the 9th of September. And it just gives a feel of what it must have looked like and felt like. There's another picture of it. Yeah, because we tend to look at the green photographs I put up, and you've got to remember, I was just devastated all these places. It was so hard. So many soldiers got lost. It's no wonder. There's no marker. Well, you wouldn't know where you were. So I now wanted to find out, to finish the story, I know various ways to find out exactly where they died and how to get some real records. So I'm back into the war diary. You can see here B Company at the top, and it's telling their story. On the night of the 9th, and it refers to one platoon, two platoons were sent up. One platoon got lost and came back unharmed. And another one here, which is the platoon that we know Thomas was in, were at a strong point of T13A. I know the sector was 57C from, I have no idea what this meant, or it didn't have. The sector was 57C, and the reference here to the trench T13A. I contacted the Western Front Association, and they said, you need to go on, you can all do it, go online, something called T-Mapper, which I did. And when you put 57C.T.13.A, you can get a split screen. On the left is an Ordnance Survey map of today, and on the right are the trenches.
Gosh.
Yeah, I've got Joyce raising hand. Joyce, we're going to say something? That's probably by accident, is it? You touched your hand, somebody's touched your hand. That's okay. I've got my work hat on. So we can see from there. Now, of course, I've got on the right there the trench, but because I already had a better map of the trenches, when you put those two together, it's pretty obvious to me. I'll let you study it, but that's on the intersection between Hop Alley and Beer Trench. Absolutely no doubt. You look at the shape of Hop Alley and Beer Trench, that is exactly that.
Yeah. Good.
So this survives. So this track is there. So I will probably visit. We'll talk about that maybe another day, but I'm certainly going to go over for the school and do a live Skype. And I know some of you, I think, will probably say we'd love to go over as well. It is really worth doing in a post-COVID world. But it will be an open field, and you've got to be very careful because of some places you can't go because there are shells, unexploded shells still around. But you're going to be so close, if not absolutely, to the yard.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible thing. What I do know is another part of the diary referred to where he was killed here. But you'll see in a minute, I'll show you where they're buried. He was actually buried, if you look on the left, about here, where these two lines cross. He was initially buried here and then moved into Delville Wood. I think that now. So, and a few of them were buried there, first safe place. And they then, at the end of the war, they made a bigger cemetery to bring more soldiers into there, which I can go on to in a minute. There's where Delville Wood Cemetery is. Very easy to get. It would be a very easy journey. Arras is a great place to stay, and a brilliant thing to remember him. These are the documents you can get on the Commonwealth War Graves site, so any of you can dig these out. And this is the document from the time when he was being laid to rest. So it's a reference here. There he is in the red. Lance Corporal T. Fairhurst, South Lancs, 9th of September 1916, age 24. 7F10, we'll come to the plan in a minute, is where his grave is. What I found really interesting on this document is, if you look at the other soldiers buried near him, unknown British soldier, unknown British soldier, unknown British soldier, another two there, another two there, another two there.
Oh, wow.
One at the bottom. I think this is a sign. There's no nice way of saying it, but there were many men that they never got their remains. They were blown to bits. Yeah, or they couldn't get them out. They were in a trench that became no man's land, and they were in there for months. So I think in this case, it probably isn't the case. I think it's more they were blasted to it. It's horrible. You don't want to think about it, but they clearly found enough to identify Thomas, which might have been a dog tag, but whatever, they did find him. So he has got a grave. Yeah, this is the bit where it tells you where I found where he was buried. So here he is. Private T. Fairhurst. They got the wrong number and corrected it on a later document. And he's not a private, he's a Lance Corporal. So they were, it must have been hard. I mean, again, for me, there's evidence here of how much have they found of him. You know, they got something they know, but maybe not everything. And they eventually corrected that. But it's saying map reference where body found. And that's where I found that. So the found means where, so there you've got the exact location of where his first was. I'm going to say it again. As a family, you are so lucky to get this amount of information. There's so much that's telling his story. You know, when we'll talk about remembering people, goodness me, you know, you've got his entire story to remember. There's the cemetery, and I put a little blue mark where his grave is. You know. So there's the entrance at the bottom. Cross the sacrifice in the middle, so you wouldn't find it very hard to find his grave. It'd be one of the first ones that's there. And I did find, virtually at the end now, I did find in ancestry actually, the soldiers' effects. So you can see here, this is the register of what he sent home. Thomas Fairhurst, he had £12, 13 shillings and 5 pence. For those of you my age or older, you'll understand pounds, shillings and pence. So it's £12, 13. What I find really sad in this is you can see at the bottom here, war gratuity, £8 and 10 shillings. And I always say when I do these stories, what price of life?
Yeah, that's terrible.
You know, the family got £8, 10 shillings for the loss of their son, and I find it awful, just awful that. But one really nice thing to finish on is we have a picture of his grave.
Oh wow!
And that's thanks to the Grappenhall, to Caroline Wendy of the Grappenhall History Society. 100 years after the commemoration of the First World War, they tried to visit all the names that were on the memorial board in the church. So they did Thomas's, and they've sent me that picture. And you can see at the bottom, never for the words that his father sent off, never forgotten by father and mother. And underneath that, this plants here hide it. I think it says, and everyone else at home, something like that, and all at home. But for the service next week, if any of you come, you will cry buckets. Their music lead, Fran, is an amazing talent. And with the children, she's written a song called Never Forgotten. It's Thomas's song. It gets its first. They deliberately didn't want to sing it in public other than next Tuesday. So we practiced it today, and it was with nobody in the church. I just can't describe how that was. You know, to know that the words the family chose, the school will sing forever in remembering him. It's a wonder way to finish it. And the very, very final bits are the obituaries, the 2 local papers, the Warrington Guardian. There was another one at the time, the Warrington Examiner. There's the Guardian story. This is 3 weeks after he died. This story is carried. And actually, it's brilliant to get. You don't often get a photograph. Many of the soldiers, families couldn't afford to put their announcement in the newspaper. So many of them didn't get their stories told or their announcements. It's brilliant that Thomas's does. So there's the Guardian one. I know you can't read that, but there he is right in the middle.
Yeah.
There he is, Grappenhall, and I can make that a bit better. So that is the Warrington Research
Soldier.
And it's just fantastic to have, you know, that tribute to him, to know that, you know, kind of all the residents of Warrington, all his family friends would have seen this. So that is, my last picture. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't too long, but it was too dramatic a story not to give you all that.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you.
Chris, before you wind off, Chris.
Yeah.
Several times you said we were lucky with certain things. We've been very lucky that we've had you to research all this, which has been absolutely fascinating. We're very, very grateful indeed. So thank you very much. Look forward to the service.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I'll put this online, because anybody who didn't get it, and also for yourselves, if you want to refer to anything, it's actually a handy way of having the story. One thing I am going to do with the children is I'll do a proper film. So some of the pictures you've seen, it'll be a repeat of a lot of what you've seen. I've got a few more details, but I'll do that I'd like to get the children to tell the story a little bit. So it'll be a proper, hopefully this side of Christmas, proper story giving all, because I think that just really finishes off. And of course the children couldn't wait. They can't wait for me to report back after tonight. because they know you're all getting this, and they are. I can't describe how they've taken to the story. They've just been. I think what we've learned is, and you're right. You've no idea how many hours I put in digging it out. It's a lot. There's a lot to get through. But when there's that volume of stuff there, you don't want to lose any of it because you think it is so important. But I think the children, what we've learned with the children, I've done a few of these, is the way for them to understand and get an appreciation of how horrible war is not just to say that, and not just to talk about remembrance as a theme, but if you do it through a person, and if that person is someone who went to their school, and I'd actually now say for you, when it's your relative, it feels completely different when it's personalized like that. Which is why Moira, I was so glad to come and visit Moira and Harry, because I was 3 lessons at school without talking about the war, because for me, it's just as important. They learn about the human being. So by the time we did the war, they know who this Thomas is. They know his family. They know they've got a whole sense of he's just like them. He's no different to them. So it makes the whole impact of, those stories. I actually think, I know he died on the Somme in 1916, but I think his experiences in June 1915 at Ypres must have deeply scarred him. It must have been just absolutely horrendous for him. I suspect he never got through that, even though he carried on fighting and lost his life on the Somme. But yeah, I think so. And I think to know that, I think it's just, I hope you all feel it, that you might have never known that. You might have just known you did have a relative, an uncle, a great uncle, whatever, a great great uncle who you knew died in the war. And for most people, that's all they know. Yes. I think it's brilliant that you've now got, I don't doubt you'll tell this story to all sorts of people, and will continue to do so. I always end up saying, let the youngsters know, because you need each generation to carry this story going through. So the little one that we saw earlier is definitely too young to understand this now, but I think in 10 years' time, I'd like that. I think it's important that the baton gets handed down and the story's sort of never gone. And one thing we do know is St Wilfrid's are never going to forget this story, because it's now in their curriculum. It is. It's just, and I'm going to say it. If any of you can come on Tuesday, you won't regret it. It's the most incredible service that's been constructed, and we tell Thomas's story, obviously very briefly, but the children do all of it. The combination of that, and I know, Anthony, I know you're hoping you can make it. Fingers crossed, and Caroline. And what I would say is, you two have got a part you're going to read, which is brilliant, and the children can't wait for that. If you wanted to precede it, entirely up to you, just to say your own words, do it. If you wanted to say, this has meant a lot to me, and I really, whatever, it doesn't just have to be, do whatever you want on it. If you wanted to do 20 seconds saying something, don't feel under any pressure for that. It's kind of how you feel. I suspect by the time you get up, because you're right at the end, you will have been so emotionally affected by what's preceded you that you'll do well just to get the words out.
No challenge, Woody.
No pressure. No pressure.
Oh. But okay, thanks everyone. I say,
thank you.
Oh, sorry, and just one. Sorry, I did have one thing I wanted to say. Let me share the screen again, because I don't know who wants what, but the war diary looks like that. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Well, there's pages, reams of it. So if it's not an easy document to read. You've got 2 years of them. I can easily pass it to you, so that's not the issue. The service record, if you want them, there are 19 pages, and each one, you've seen some on screen. But the big deal, I think you will say you fancy, because for me to do this, I can't work with 200 pages or whatever of war diary, so I convert it into, this is my document. So that is Thomas's war in my language. The black is what he did. The blue is what was going on contextually in the war. So it will tell you kind of what's going on around battles, and I go red when he's at the front line, because I think it just gives a clear, they're the 3 areas you'd mostly, but you'd see how much I've written. This is a précis. So that is, trust me, is a darn sight better than hundreds of pages of war diary.
Would you like a copy of that, Chris? Yes.
So if I said, do you want me to send it to all of you, all those things?
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
yes,
fine.
please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
And to be honest with you, if it's too much and you don't need to see it all, but I think particularly the war diary and the service record is so personal.
Service record,
I'd like you to have that.
Yeah. Yes, please. Yes.
Right. Okay. I should make a note. Don't make notes and never do things. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Lovely meeting you.
Really fantastic.
Lovely meeting you.
Thank
Take care.
Bye.
Very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye, Carol.